Hello everyone, my name is Ioana Salmonides. Welcome to Victorian Opera's latest online series, 15 Years of New Opera. This year, Victorian Opera celebrates its 15th anniversary, and to commemorate this milestone, we're taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting some of the new works the company has commissioned since it was founded. It has always been part of Victorian Opera's artistic vision to create new opera, and the company has committed to producing at least one new work each year. New works offer opportunities to expand on the potential of opera by collaborating with other art forms and organisations, developing relationships with and performance opportunities for young artists and members of the community, and most importantly, telling stories that are contemporary and relevant to today's society. Literature is a great source from which to adapt opera, and many of the new works Victorian Opera has commissioned over the last 15 years sees a colourful array of literary characters and scenes leave the page to take shape on stage. It's the job of the librettist to condense the thousands of words that make up a text without betraying the storyline of the original work. So how is this done? And what are some of the key factors to consider when commissioned to write a libretto that's adapted from a literary work? I caught up with writers Daniel Keane and Alison Croggan to discuss how they went about writing the librettos for Three Tales and The Riders. How does writing a libretto differ from writing for another literary genre?
Well, 95% of the stuff I've written is for the theatre, and I've written some films as well. So writing for opera is obviously allied to writing for the theatre in as much as they're both performative texts. So the text is going to be heard. So so the thing you can't do is write if you're writing for opera, you can't write naturalism or realism because it takes too long, basically. Because to sing something takes a lot longer than to say something. So you need to be very, very concise and accurate. And I think it's true of theatre as well, that you have to have a good sense of cadence or rhythm, that because the language is going to be spoken in the theatre, some of the same rules apply, that the music of the language has to be present. So I suppose that when writing for opera, it pushes that even further. So it becomes a little bit more formal. You have to be much more aware of the rhythms you're creating or the cadence, so that it's allied, but it's in a way it's a kind of it's really refined in as much as it's distilled down to just essential things. Because, as I say, you don't have a lot of time. And you don't have a lot of space, so you have to be very, very precise. And it's closer to poetry than it is to prose. Again, you're having to find the essential things.
How did you choose which scenes, words, or phrases to include in your adaptation of Gustave Le Beau's Three Tales?
Well, it's essentially because they're short stories, so you're not having to look at a whole novel and pick episodes, But even though it's a short story, there are a lot of things you have to leave out. So that for me, it was more like searching through the stories and finding images that I found really, really strong, that seemed to resonate, that would work linguistically, so that. And it was actually quite good knowing that Simple Heart would be one voice, because it was like an interior monologue. It was Felicity's own voice inside her head. So that was a theatrical device. So that was kind of simple to approach. The other two are more difficult because, particularly Julien, because there's a lot of characters in that story. So rather than trying to people the libretto with all the different characters, his family, his wife, I decided on a chorus of animals, because he starts off as a hunter and he kills everything sort of that moves. So I thought that'd be great revenge for the animals, for them to actually tell Julian's story. So that image of the animal chorus was the key for me to continue with the text. And then in the Herodias, it's just really it's one dramatic moment. It's that confrontation with John the Baptist, and it's a simple dramatic, situation. And then it was trying to go through the texts and find the language that Flaubert was using, because he's a master at, how he creates his world. And then picking the eyes out of that and finding not necessarily phrases, but words and images that stuck in my head.
Creatures howling, roaring, the forest crawling with shadows. Whatever bites, whatever stings, or jumps, teeth that cut, claws that rip, surround him. Come to me, jaws, beaks, horns, wings, come to me. He strikes, the smoke, spear, and life. Oh, disembark! Crossbows, rolling, screeching. Is unto weak, is silence good? No kill, no prize, no smell of blood. The eyes of animals, like stars out in the trees, the things
Some of the literary works that are adapted for opera can be quite lengthy. How did you figure out what parts of Tim Winton's novel would make it into the opera? Or was it more about finding a way to retell the story?
In this case, it was very much about retelling the story. So it's a complicated plot in that book. I mean, I obviously read the book more than once, and took out the odd phrase where something seemed kind of like I could turn that into some kind of lyric, because of course if you're writing for singers, it's really important that you're writing lyrics that are singable. There's some words you can't use, or more likely phrases that are difficult for singers to actually sing, and there is not a lot of words. It's important there's not a lot of words because there's just not time. I think as a rough rule of thumb, I work on singing taking 3 times as long as speaking. But the other thing that the language must do in an opera, as opposed to a novel, is it carries the emotional narrative. I mean, opera for me is an emotional narrative. It's there's all the music carrying it in one way or another. I think sort of almost every kind of opera, actually. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of operas, but particularly a narrative opera like this one. I don't often write narrative operas as such, but there has to be some kind of thing going on, but there's not enough space. Again, there's not many words where you can put a complicated plot in. So I actually had initially Neil Armfield was going to direct this show. So I had a week with him and Ian Grandage just sitting down. I'd already written a first draft because I just didn't want to go into a workshop without offering something. And I was the new kid in this collaboration anyway. But I had a fairly solid first draft to take in with me. But it was really good talking through various things, particularly with Neil Armfield because of his familiarity with the book. He'd been working on a film adaptation. And one of the things that concerned me about the book, I think, was the idea of the disappearing woman, and who's, kind of disappears for no reason and is quite... there's a certain problem around what her absence is, and I found that quite troubling. So one of the things I wanted to do is to make her present in the book, because also you can't dramatise an absence in a drama like that. So she's much more present in the adaptation.
Just a thought of her böse Biest, knowing and my gods. Just a thought of her, alone and burnt. Just a thought of her, waiting for me. Just a thought of her, needing me. Just a thought of her, just a thought of her, just.
How do you establish the meter or rhythm of the text for the libretto? Is this something that is discussed with the composer prior to your writing it? Or does the composer just match the meter that you set up in the text?
Basically, I wrote the text. I suppose that one of the jobs of the libretto is to create the dramaturgy of the theatre that the opera will eventually be. So there's one of the big weaknesses of many libretti is, in fact, its lack of dramaturgy. So it throws it all on the music to do that. And the music is a really important part of it, but I think it's a big plus if the libretto is already setting up some kind of dramatic arc that can drive through on its own without the music. So for me, the text has to work as a text. It's a peculiar text because, it's even more peculiar than just writing, say, for spoken performance, because you have two absences. You don't just have the voice of the actor or the performer, you have the absence of music, which is a huge part of what the eventual thing ends up. People work in different ways, but I always write the text first and then talk it through with the composer. So I think it went through 2 or 3 drafts, and then once we're, like with the writers, once Ian and I were quite solid that was the text we wanted. We did have an extremely peculiar experience of a reading of it at the Malthouse. Like they very nicely sort of got some excellent actors together and we sat down and had a reading, which is kind of actually interesting because I won a battle with Ian because I wanted to cut something out, a bit that I thought was just, going around in circles, and he was going, no, I love it. And I was like, no, it's not working. And we walked out of the reading and he said, Alison, you were absolutely right. So yay. But it's, of course, isn't like a reading of a play because it's nothing like what the thing is going to be. But what it can give you is, I suppose, a sense of the shape of it. And anything that helps with that is very useful.
Well, in this case, I didn't talk to any of the composers. There are 3 composers, but the commission came in. I knew there would be 3 composers. I knew how they were. I listened to what's some of their music that I could find. I went to see Plexus perform, so I understood the dynamic of the group. Or I appreciated the dynamic of the group. I understood that Katie Noonan was going to sing, and A Simple Heart or Felicity would be a single voice. So that, given that, I had to just then concentrate on the text, like look at the story, Flaubert's stories, and find a way to reduce them into a libretto. And then it was interesting because it was what I was waiting for was the response of the composers to the text. So, and the 3 texts are very different because the 3 stories are very different. They all have a different feeling, completely different feeling. So I tried to mirror that in the librettos so that with A Simple Heart, it's a very tender, it's quite a sad story, but it's also quite funny sometimes. So I wanted to write a text that had that lyric quality, that softness in it. And because writing for one voice, for me, was familiar because it's like writing a monologue in the theatre. Julian is a much harsher, more brutal, almost sadistic sort of story. And Herodias is kind of really stern, So I tried to reflect that in the 3 librettos. And then it was a question of what would the composers respond to in those texts. But the idea of adapting something is also an act of interpretation. So when I read the stories and I adapt them, I'm interpreting them. It's my response to those stories. And then the same thing comes from the composers in response to my text. So it's a lovely sort of process in that sense. Yeah.
My mistress is a widow, but the envy of poor Levick, having a son so faithful in her service. Cooking, sweeping, scrubbing, churning for modest pay.
So there you have it. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Next time, we take a look at some of Victorian Opera's commissioned works that were written for children, young artists, and members of the community. Until then, take care.